How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Tes, Daf 9, Mishnah Horayos. Friends, Daf Tes. Well, today we are going to wrap up the second parak of Mishnah Horayos, and we are going to continue the discussion of Korbin, oleh, v'yored in the context of Parlam Davar Shel Tzibur and Sa'ir Nasi, Parkoin Mashiach. A lot of details, lot of details. Good stuff though, good stuff. You know, it's kind of opening up the door to the different kinds of korbanos. It's good, but it's kind of like a lot to work through. It's interesting that it's not like sugyas on today's daf. It's just like kind of more of working through what applies to which korbanos, and then we get to a second mishnah on today's daf, which actually is pretty interesting because it's like kind of like a summary. It's kind of like a summary mishnah of all the details that we've been discussing the past few days of which korbanos for which context. It's an interesting mishnah because it kind of lays out a lot of what we've learned over the past few days, which is actually kind of cool. And then that'll take us to the end of today's daf and to the end of the second parak of Masechta Horayos. So friends, let us jump in. All right, friends, our journey begins on Daf Chesed Beis at the Mishnah about 10 lines from the bottom or so. Says the Mishnah, Ein chayavin al shmias kol ba'al bitus v'sayim ba'al tumas bitus v'kadoshim. Kind of similar to the Mishnah that we learned at the end of the daf yesterday. What was that Mishnah? Or if you look earlier up on the same Amud, it says, Ein chayavin al esev al asayis shev mikdash, which is tumas mikdash v'kadoshim. And the reason for that was because it's Korbin, oleh, v'yored. But anyways, back to our Mishnah. So in chayavin al shmias kol ba'al bitus v'sayim ba'al tumas mikdash v'kadoshim. Who could tell me what those things are? Think Masechta Shavuos. Shmias kol is Shvuas ha'edus. Bituis v'sayim is Shvuas bitui. And Tumas Mikdash v'Kodoshav is Tumas Mikdash v'Kodoshav. All of those, of course, are from the beginning of Parak Hey in Sefer Vayikra, which we learned all about in Masechta Shavuos. And it says explicitly, black on white, that the Korbin for those Shvos Eidos, Shvos Bitoy, Tumas Mikdash v'Kodashim, the Korbin is Korbin oleh v'yored. That, depending on what you can afford, is the kind of Korbin that you offer. So now we had said that Parlam Davar Shel Tzibur is only by something that you chayav al zdono kares v'ashigaso chatos kavua, proper korban chatos, not a korban oleh v'yored. So here we are saying that ein chayovin, that there's no parlam davar shel tzibur al shmias kol v'al bitos v'sayim v'al tumas mikdash v'kodashav, because all of those are korban oleh v'yoreds, and parlam davar shel tzibur is only by a chatos kavua. For example, if you accidentally ate cheleb, ve'anosi kayotziboim divrei Rabbi Yossi HaGalili. And now says Rabbi Yossi HaGalili that the same applies to a nasi, to a king. A king would also not bring a korban oleh v'yored. A king would not bring a korban oleh v'yored. As we're going to see, does it continue now? Okay, not yet. Anyways, of course, as we know from Masechta Sanhedrin, a king doesn't testify. So therefore, Shvuas ha'edus is irrelevant to a king, because kings don't testify. And Rabbi Yossi HaGalili says that also the king, by Shvuas bitui, by Tumas Mikdash v'Kodoshav, would not bring any korban. Rabbi Kiva says, Rabbi Kiva, Hanosi chayev b'chulon chutz mishmias hakol. Whereas Rabbi Akiva says that the king would bring a korban oleh v'yored for Shvuas bitui, for Tumas Mikdash v'Kodoshav, just not for Shvuas ha'edus. She'amelech lo dan v'lo danan also lo meid v'lo meidin also, that a king doesn't judge, nor is he judged. He doesn't testify, nor is he testified about. And therefore, shvuas ha'edus, when they say, hey, you got to testify for us, and he swears he doesn't know testimony, he's not shaykh to king because the king doesn't testify. But it says Rabbi Kiva, other than that, shvuas bitoy to mismikdash v'kodashav, there would be a Korbin for a king. Says the Gemara, Amar Ula says, my time with Rabbi Yossi Aglili. How come Rabbi Yossi Aglili says that a king is not shaykh to any of the Korbin oleh v'yoreds? The answer is, Amar Kra, the pasuk says, according to Ula, well, Ula explains, according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, that since the pasuk says, V'haya ki yesham le'achas me'ele, the pasuk says by Korbin oleh v'yored, as I mentioned, it's at the beginning of Perek Hey of Sefer Vayikra. It talks about Shvuas Bitoy, Shvuas Ha'edos, Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashav, and it says there, V'hoyo ki yesham la'achas me'ele, if one will be guilty of any of these sins, Kol she'mischayev ba'achas, mischayev b'kulin. Anybody, right, a person who is chayiv for any one of those three averis is chayiv for any of the averis. V'she'ein mischayev ba'achas. However, if there is somebody who one of those averis is not relevant to him, for example, the king is not relevant, right? So shvuas ha'edus is not relevant to a king who doesn't testify. Well, then ein mischayev b'chulin. Well, then none of them are going to be relevant to a king, and the king simply doesn't bring any korban oleh v'yoreds. So, according to Ula, he explains Rabbi Yossi Aglili as understanding that pasuk of v'hoya ki yeshem la'achas me'ele, that in order to be chayiv a korban oleh v'yored, you would have to be a person who any of those three averis would be relevant to that person. A king, however, shvuas ha'edus is not relevant to a king. Therefore, none of the averis that carry a korban oleh v'yored, none of those are relevant to a king. Ve'ema mischayev ba'achas me'en v'afal pi she'en mischayev b'kulon. But one second, can't I make the argument to say that kind of the opposite? That right, ki yeshem la'achas me'ele, that even somebody to whom only one of these averis is relevant, so then bring a korban oleh v'yored for any ones that are relevant. So kilu, a king should have to bring a korban oleh v'yored for shvuas bitoy, for tumas mikdash v'kodashav, for the ones that are relevant. Okay, not for shvuas ha'edus, but at the time of Rabbi Yossi Aglili mihacha. Rather, Rabbi Yossi Aglili's rationale is from here, the Sanya. Rabbi Yirmiyah Omer. Interesting. I didn't know that Rabbi Yirmiyah would have been in a brisa. I always thought that Rabbi Yirmiyah was in Amora, in the same generation as Reb Zera. Anyways, maybe there was a Rabbi Yirmiyah who was a Tana. I don't know. That Rabbi Yirmiyah said, "Nemar leisagia yado v'nemar los." Excuse me, sheesh. Nemar lo sagia yado v'nemar lo sasig yado. Mishe ba lidei anius v'ashirus yotze nasi u'mashiach shein bon lidei anius. So says Rabbi Yirmiyah in a brisa, an interesting approach, which is that it says so what's a korban oleh v'yored? Who could tell me what's a korban oleh v'yored? We learned all about it in Masechta Shavuos. We learned about it yesterday as well. I'm sure we're going to learn about it more in the coming year or two. This next year is going to be Kodshim. Last year, the year before the one that we're wrapping up now, was all about Bava Kama, Bava Metziva, Bava. So this year was about wrapping up Nezikin with Sanhedrin and Makis and Shavuos and Avodah Zarah, etc. Next year is going to be straight up Kodshim Chevra. We're mamish like starting right at Rosh Hashanah time. We're starting Zvachim, the Menachos, Chulin. That's the year ahead of us. Zvachim, Menachos, Chulin. That's this coming year. And then next year, and then Chevra, this is the last real intense year of Babble and Talmud, Chevra. This is going to be the last intense year. Chevra, cherish it. Cherish it. You're never going to get this back. You're never going to get this back this next year. This is going to be the last real intensive year of Babble and Talmud, Chevra. Zvachim, Menachos, Chulin. After that, the following year, he's going to be really wrapping up Shas, Chevra. Bechoris, Arochin, Temura, the kind of those smaller Mesechtas, and then that's it, Chevra. Anyways, back to our subject at hand. So when it comes to Korbin oleh v'yored, so the whole point of Korbin oleh v'yored is that it's dependent on what you can afford. If you're wealthy, so bring a kispa v'sira, animals, sheep, goat. If you can afford less, so bring birds. If you can afford less than that, if you're poor, so then bring simply some flour. So the point is, Korbin oleh v'yored, it depends. Are you rich? Are you poor? Right? It could even be the same person. Sometimes he's rich, sometimes he's poor. When he's rich, he brings the sheep. When he's poor, he brings flour, etc. So the point being, so says Rabbi Yirmiyah, being that this is the case, that this is a Korbin that inherently is about how, are you rich? Are you poor? That's a question that's not relevant to a king or to a Kohen Gadol, as the Brisa points out. Rich and poor is not a description, is not a status that's even relevant to the king. The king is beyond wealth. He has whatever he wants at whenever he wants it. Right? Obviously, he's extremely wealthy. There's never going to be a scenario in which a king is bringing a flour offering. It's not relevant. Like, oh, is he rich? Is he poor? He's the king. So the king, and a Kohen Gadol for that matter, as we're going to explain in a minute, doesn't bring a Korbin oleh v'yored, because a Korbin that's inherently, the whole idea of it is like, are you rich? Are you poor? That's a sort of sphere, that's an orbit that the king doesn't live in. The king lives in a different orbit in which there's no rich, there's just wealth. There's just having whatever you want, whenever you want it. And therefore, Korbin oleh v'yoreds are not something that's shaykh to a king who there's no ups and downs, wealthy, poor. There's just being really rich. So again, the Tanya Rabbi Yirmiyah Omer, in Nemar, it says by a Korbin oleh v'yored, lo sagia yado, if he can't afford, v'nemar lo sasig yado, right? So what does it say? V'im lo sagia yado de se, if he can't afford a sheep, and the next place says v'im lo sasig yado l'shtei tzomar, and if he can't afford the birds, then he brings flour offering. Misha bali de aniyus v'ashirus, that bichlal Korbin oleh v'yored is only relevant to people to whom their reality allows for as part of their reality there's wealth and there's poverty. Yotze Nasi Mashiach. This excludes therefore the king, the Kohen Gadol, she'ein boin lidei anius. They don't become poor. They are wealthy, and they are always wealthy. Nasi dichsiv v'asa achas mikol mitzvahs Hashem Elokav. By Nasi, it says, and he does one of the mitzvahs of Hashem, his God. Mishe'ein al gabav ela Hashem Elokav. The Nasi is somebody for whom there is nobody above him other than the Rabbani Shalom. There is no other authority greater than him. He is the king, and kings are inherently rich. The Mashiach dichsiv, and the Kohen Gadol, that it says, v'hakohen hagadol me'echov. The Kohen who is greater than his brethren, than his fellow Kohanim. Shehu Gadol me'echad benoi, he's more beautiful than his fellow Kohanim. B'choyach, he's strong. B'chochma, he's smart. He's wise. V'osher, and he's wealthy. Acherim says, Minayin she'im ein lo gadleu mishal echad. And how do we know that, let's say he isn't wealthy, so make him wealthy. Give him money. Make him wealthy. But whatever it is, ensure that he is wealthy. So there's no concept of a Kohen Gadol who's poor. Kohen Gadols are automatically wealthy, and if they're not, make him wealthy. That the Kohen who is Gadol me'echov, that even if he is not wealthy, make him wealthy, make him great. So therefore, to answer our initial question, why does Rabbi Yosef Aglili say that a nasi, that a king, does not bring Korbin oleh v'yoreds? Because Korbin oleh v'yoreds are for people that could be wealthy, could be poor. Kings and and Kohen Gadol, for that matter, are just simply always wealthy. There's no potential there's no possibility of them being poor and bringing a flower offering. It's simply not going to happen. Therefore, Korbin oleh v'yorids are not for them, according to Rabbi Yosef Glili. So Ravina asks Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Nasi shenitztareya ma'u. What happens if you have a king that gets tsaras? And because he has tsaras, he's no longer the king. So, midchadachi, do we say, well, once he becomes the king, so then Korbin oleh v'yored is pashit, not shaykh, or even if we just talk about Shvuas HaEdos, even, it's not, oh no, well, right, I guess we're probably asking according to Rav Yosef Glili, according to this concept that somebody who's so rich that Korbin oleh v'yorids are not shaykh to them. So now what happens when you have a king who is now no longer the king? So would they bring a Korbin oleh v'yored? Do we say the mitchadachi that, look, once this person becomes king, so it's forever pushed off. There's no Korbin oleh v'yored when they're king, and there's no Korbin oleh v'yored ever for the rest of their life, even if they get saras and they're no longer the king. Oh, mifter patur, or do we say that while he's the king, he's patur? But if he's no longer the king, so he's shaykh once again to Korbin oleh v'yored. Amar lei, to which Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak responds, dilach o digaza. It's kind of a funny answer, if I understand at least the first part correctly. Dilach, like, I think Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak responds to Ravina like, are you paying for his right? Dilach, is it yours? Are you paying for his Korbin oleh v'yored? O digaza, or is he paying for his own Korbin oleh v'yored from his own coffers? And the answer, obviously, is the king is going, this person who was the king and he got saras, he's going to be paying for this, potentially for this Korbin oleh v'yored from his own wealth. And just because he's no longer the king doesn't mean that he's no longer filthy rich. When he was the king, he got a lot of money, put it in his bank account, and just because he's no longer the king, that has nothing to do with it. He's still extremely wealthy. And if the whole point of saying that he doesn't bring a Korbin oleh v'yored is because oleh v'yoreds are for people who they could be wealthy, could be poor. Once he's the king, he's set for life, and therefore, even though right now he isn't the king because he got saras, he's still filthy rich, and therefore Korbin oleh v'yoreds are not going to be shaykh for him still. Tani Rabbi Akiva says, Rabbi Akiva Mashiach Potter Mikulad. Says Rabbi Akiva that the Kohen Gadol does not bring any of the Korbin oleh v'yoreds. Omar Rav, says Rav, my taima, the Rabbi Akiva. How come Rabbi Akiva says that a king, that a Kohen Gadol does not bring any of the Korbin oleh v'yoreds? Because the pasuk says Zeh Korbin Aaron Uvanav. That the minchas chavitin is the flour offering that the Kohen Gadol would offer every single day. Machziso be'erev, machziso b'boker, machziso be'erev, I believe. Half of it in the morning, half of it in the evening. Now, zo ba'achovalo ve'en acheres ba'achovalo. That the only flour offering that a Kohen Gadol offers is the minchas chavitin, not a Korbin oleh v'yored. Right, Korbin oleh v'yored, there's three possibilities, right? If you can afford it, so it's kispa v'sira, otherwise shtei Torah mushne b'nei Yonah, and otherwise a flour offering. And because the only flour offering that a Kohen Gadol offers is the minchas chavitin, and not the potential flour offering for a Korbin oleh v'yored, therefore there's no possibility of a Kohen Gadol offering the flour offering of a Korbin oleh v'yored, because the only flour offering that he offers is minchas chavitin, and therefore, because the flour offering option of the Korbin oleh v'yored is irrelevant to a Kohen Gadol, therefore all of the options, just like the flour offering is irrelevant for the Kohen Gadol, all of the options, the birds, the sheep / goats, they're all off the table. Ve'ema kimemayit le'rachmono midale dalus umaniu. But now the Gemara says, wait, but 1 second, why are you throwing out the baby with the bathwater? why don't we say, look, okay, I understand. Kohen Gadol, the only flour offering he offers is a minchas chavitin, not the flour offering associated with the Korbin oleh v'yored. Okay, so fine. So say that the Kohen Gadol simply doesn't offer, right? The flour offering option for Korbin oleh v'yored is off limits, right? Is not an option for the Kohen Gadol, but maybe he can offer birds or sheep. Aval anius v'ashirus, right? Meaning dali, the flour offering is dali dalus, but then there's also anius, which would be the birds, and ashirus, which is the sheep/goats. So now, let's say, okay, fine. So Kohen Gadol wouldn't offer the flour option, but what about the birds? What about the sheep/goats? Lo ma'at aval anius v'ashirus. Lo ma'ate rachmana. Maybe the Kohen Gadol should be able to offer those, the birds, the sheep. I'll just refer to the sheep/goats as sheep, maybe. Lo sakadatich. No. Tichsiv v'chiper olav akoin al chatoso asher chata me'achas me'ele. That the pasuk says by the flour offering of the Korbin oleh v'yored, it says v'chiper olav akoin, that the kohen will atone for the bringer. Al chatoso asher chata, for the sin that he sinned, me'achas me'ele, from any of these. Meaning, these, in this context, it's referring to the flour offering, the birds, and the sheep. Anybody who can get kapara by the Korbin oleh v'yored by any of the three options, well then, all of the options are available to them. But if there are any of the three that are irrelevant to them, for example, the flour option for the Kohen Gadol, well then, all options are off the table in that case, and there is simply no Korbin oleh v'yored by a Kohen Gadol, since the Kohen Gadol will not be offering the flour option. So because it says, because he won't be offering the flour offering, he won't be offering any of the Korbin oleh v'yored options. So Korbin oleh v'yored is not shaykh to a Kohen Gadol, according to Rabbi Kiva. But fact the Gemara, that the pasuk says just a few psukim earlier, I believe, if I can see that correctly, 8 psukim earlier, the pasuk says and that was a reference to the 3. Right, that's a reference to the 3 averis, right? When it comes to the Korbin oleh v'yored, so there's 3 possible korbanos, right? The flour offering, the birds, the sheep. But there's also 3 averis that Korbin oleh v'yoreds come from. Who could tell me what they are? Tumas mikdash v'kodashav, shvus bitui, and shvus ha'edus. So now, Chava, listen to this question. You listening? The question is, Rabbi Akiva just came and he said, well, a Kohen Gadol doesn't bring any Korbin oleh v'yoreds because since he won't be offering the flour options, he doesn't offer, so all options are off the table. But Chevra, it also says by Korbin oleh v'yored, it says le'achas and that pasuk, right? There are 2 psukim by Korbin oleh v'yored. The first pasuk that says that was in the context of the flour offering, and the achas me'ele is a reference to the different offerings, the flour offering, the bird offerings, the sheep offering. But the other pasuk that we have also by Korbin oleh v'yored is le'achas me'ele, and there it's a reference to the different averis. Shvuas bitui, shvuas ha'edus, tumas mikdash v'kodashav. So therefore, let's say that just like Rabbi Akiva says that a Kohen Gadol doesn't bring any Korbin oleh v'yoreds, because since he doesn't bring the flour option, he doesn't bring any of the options. Well, then we should apply the same thing by the other pasuk. That Rabbi Akiva would say that if you have a person who doesn't bring a Korbin oleh v'yored, because let's say he's a king and he's not shaykh to testifying, right? As we said, right, a king doesn't testify. So therefore, shvuas ha'edus is irrelevant to a king. Well, let's say therefore that Rabbi Akiva would say that a king therefore shouldn't have to bring any Korbin oleh v'yoreds, because right, the pasuk says vayikiyashem le'achas me'ele, and that's in the context of the Shvuas Ha'edus, Shvuas Bitoy, Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashim. So let's say, just like Rabbi Kiva says that by the Kohen Gadol, he's not shaykh to any of the Korbin oleh v'yorids, because since he doesn't bring the flour offering, he doesn't bring any of them. So let's also say that therefore a Nasi, since he doesn't bring a Korbin oleh v'yorid by Shvuas Ha'edus, because he doesn't testify, he shouldn't bring a Korbin oleh v'yorid by any of the Averos, not by Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashim or Shvuas Bitoy either. What do you think? Beautiful kasha, right? So again, the me'ata dichsiv, when the pasuk says v'haya kiyeshem le'achas me'ele, when the pasuk also says by tumas by Korbin oleh v'yorid v'haya kiyeshem le'achas me'ele, let's say the same drasha, that's in the context of Shvuas Eidush, Shvuas Bitoy, Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashim, hachinami d'chol neschai be'achas neschai bechulan. Only somebody who would bring a korban for any of the three averos would bring a korban by all of the averos. But if there's somebody who doesn't bring a korban for one of the averos, he wouldn't bring a korban oleh v'yorid for any of those averos. But then why does Rabbi Kiva say in our mishnah, Rabbi Kiva Omer, Nasi chayav chutz mishmias kol? Why does it say in our mishnah that Rabbi Kiva says that a king does bring korban oleh v'yorids, just not for Shvuas Ha'edus, since he doesn't testify? But shouldn't we say that since he doesn't testify and therefore he's not going to bring a korban oleh v'yorid by Shvuas Ha'edus, therefore he doesn't bring any korban oleh v'yorids? After all, that was Rabbi Kiva's mahalach when it comes to saying the Kohen Gadol doesn't bring any korban oleh v'yorid since he doesn't bring the flour offering. So Abai and Rava both say me'achas mashmalei li'achas lo mashmalei. Well, the pasuk by the Asir Seifa, by the flour offering, where Rabbi Akiva said by the Kohen Gadol, since he doesn't offer the flour offering, he doesn't offer any of those. Well, there it says me'achas me'ele, and there Rabbi Akiva says that me'achas means that if he doesn't offer the flour offering, he doesn't offer any of the offerings. But li'achas, which was by the Shvuas Ha'edus, Shvuas Bitoy, Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashim, he doesn't learn that would be as exclusionary, and therefore even though the Nasi would not offer a korban oleh v'yorid by Shvuas Ha'edus, he still would offer a korban oleh v'yorid by Shvuas Bitoy and Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashim. V'mashna, what's the difference between li'achas, me'achas? Me'achas demashma lei. I'm sorry. Mashma me'achas demashma lei dechosve rachmano levasof. The reason why Rabbi Kiva makes the drasha by the flour to say that if he's not going to offer the flour offering, he's not going to offer any of the offerings, is because when it says me'achas me'ele, the Torah specifically wrote that by the flour offering. It could have written it by the bird offerings. It could have written it by the sheep offering, but it wrote it by the flour offering, and that was intentional. To tell us that only somebody who is relevant, right, to whom a flour offering is relevant, brings any of the options for a korban oleh v'yorid. Because if it would enter your mind that if you are chayiv to bring any of the three korbanos, for example, the bird offerings, the sheep offering, then you offer any of them. So then, me'achas me'ele bedalos, if that's the case, then me'achas could have been written by the bird offerings, by the sheep offerings. Why was it written specifically by the flour offering? To tell us that if you're not going to be bringing the flour offering, for example, a Kohen Gadol, so then don't bring any of the offerings, and therefore a Kohen Gadol doesn't bring korban oleh v'yorid whatsoever. However, the other pasuk of li'achas, which was not written by the flour offering, it was written by the Averis earlier in Perek Hey of Sefer Vayikra, by the Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashim, Shvuas Bitoy, Shvuas Ha'edus. There, we are not going to make that same drasha, and we say that the Nasi, even though he's not going to be bringing a korban oleh v'yorid for Shvuas Ha'edus, he would still bring a korban oleh v'yorid for Shvuas Bitoy, Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashim. Okay, now we get up to the final mishnah of the second parak of Masechta Horayos, and this is actually an interesting mishnah because it is like a type of summary of a lot of the stuff that we've been discussing for the past few days. So here we go. Says the Mishnah, Kol mitzvahs shebatorah shechayovin al zdonon koris v'shigedoson chatas. Okay, so when you have a mitzvah that you chayav intentionally koris, unintentionally chatas, chaylev, classic example. Hayochid nevi kispa v'sira. Okay, great. So a korban chatas that an individual were to bring for committing that, for doing that avera, would be either a sheep or a she goat. Ve'anosi so'ir, if you're the king, so instead of a kispa usira, you offer a so'ir. That's the so'ir nasi that we've been talking about. Umashiach ubezdin meviin par. So the kohen gadol and kohen mashiach, bezdin, when relevant, whether it's par kohen mashiach or par davar shel tzibur, they would bring a cow. Uvavodas krichovim, when it comes to avodah zarah, an individual, hayochid, ve'anasi, ve'amashiach, all of those individuals, meviin se'ira, the korban is a she-goat. Ubezdin, but if Bezdin ruled mistakenly, and therefore all the people did avodah zarah, let's say they ruled that you could bow down to Markulis, for example, well then the communal offering that will be offered is par v'sa'ir, par le'olah, v'sa'ir lechatas. It will be a cow as an olah offering and a goat as a chatas, as a sin offering. Asham talui, when it comes to an asham talui, that of course is if you're not sure if you ate chaylev, for example, so you bring in asham talui, and we said that is not relevant to a tzibur, and it is not relevant to the kohen gadol, to the kohen mashiach. Hayochid ve'anosi chayovin. So an individual, a king, would bring a asham talui for a suffix, right? Shechayvin azdono karis v'ashigos uchatas. Umashiach ubezdin p'turin, but the kohen mashiach and bezdin do not bring asham taluis, as we have learnt. Asham vadai, when it comes to an asham vadai, so for example, an asham meilos, asham gezelos, etc. Ve'hayochid ve'anasi ve'amashiach chayavin. So asham vadais are relevant for yochids, nasis, and mashiachs. Ubezdin p'turin, but bezdin does not bring a korban for an asham. Al shmiya sakov al bitus v'sayim v'atumus mikdash v'kodashu, by korban oleh v'yored, as we talked about yesterday, as we talked about today. Bezdin p'turin, so Bezdin does not offer these korbanos. Bezdin will not. There will be no pile davar shel tzibur for an asham, for a korban oleh v'yored. Ve'ayochid ve'anasi v'mashiach chayavin. So individuals bring korban oleh v'yoreds. Kings bring korban oleh v'yoreds. Kohen gadols bring korban oleh v'yoreds. Chayavin ela she'ein kohen gadol, she'ein kohen gadol mashiach chayav atamas mikdash v'gadashav tivrib Shimon. But a kohen gadol, a kohen mashiach, would not bring a korban oleh v'yored for tumas mikdash v'gadashav. That is the opinion of Rib Shimon. Mayin mevin korban oleh v'yored. The korban for any of those averes, for shvuas bitui, shvuas eidos, tumas mikdash v'gadashav, is a korban oleh v'yored, of course. Rabbi Eliezer Omer anosi mevi sa'ir. Rabbi Eliezer says that a king would offer a goat, and the Gemara is actually going to explain in what context is Rabbi Eliezer saying that the king will bring a goat. So that was an interesting mishnah, because it was kind of a summary of a lot of stuff, a lot of different korbanos, and in each context, the yachid, a nasi, a kohen mashiach, a tzibur. So we kind of, many of the things that we've discussed over the past few days, the different kind of korbanos with these different contexts of who did it. So we kind of went through those and kind of laid it out, what the halacha is in each of those cases. Says the Gemara Tani, we learn about Reb Shimon nosin klal. Reb Shimon would give a rule. Kol she'ayachid be'asham talui. Okay, so if an individual were to bring in asham talui, for example, if he's not sure if he ate chaylev, right? It is a suffix for someone that you bring a korban chatas. Hanasi kayotzebo. Okay, so the nasi would also bring an asham talui. Mashiach ubezdin pturid. A kohen Mashiach and bezdin would be pturin. They don't bring korbanos for asham talis. V'choshu ba'asham vadai. When it comes to a asham vadai, such as an asham ilos, a asham gzelos, for example, nasi umashiach kayotze bohen. So a king and a korban and a kohen Mashiach would offer asham vadais. Ubezdin pturin, but bezdin does not offer a Parlam Davar Shal Tzibur for Asham Vadais. There's no par for Asham Vadais. Shmias Hakol Uvitus Vasaim V'Tumas Mikdash V'Gadashav. When it comes to Korbin oleh v'yored, Bezdin Peturin. So Bezdin does not bring a Korbin for oleh v'yored scenarios. Nasi uMashiach Chayavin. Now a king and a Kohen Mashiach do bring Korbin oleh v'yoretz ella she'ena nasi chay b'shmias hakol, but just that a king would not bring a Korbin oleh v'yored for shvuas ha'edus because it's not relevant to him. A Korbin oleh v'yored for shvuas ha'edus. V'lo Mashiach b'tumas mikdash v'kodashav, and a Kohen Mashiach would not offer a Korbin oleh v'yored for tumas mikdash v'kodashav. Now, Reb Shimon, I believe it is Reb Shimon. Anyways, yeah, because Reb Shimon knows in Klavet. So Reb Shimon then continues, Kol shu ba'oleh v'yored, when it comes to Korbin oleh v'yored, nasi kayotze bo, so a nasi is chayiv. Mashiach ubezdin peturin. A Kohen Mashiach and Bezdin are potter by Korbin oleh v'yored, hagufa kasha. This is inherently contradictory. On the one hand, Amar she'em Mashiach chayiv, B'tumas mikdash v'kadasha with the potter. B'shmias hakol v'tus v'saim chayav. On the one hand, in the Reish, we said that when it comes to Korbin oleh v'yored for a kohen gadol, so he doesn't bring a Korbin oleh v'yored for tumas mikdash v'kadasha, but he does bring a Korbin oleh v'yored for shvuas edus, shvuas bitui. Ema seifa, but then we said Kol shu ba'oleh v'yored nasi kayotze bo Mashiach ubezdin pturin. But then we said that by oleh v'yored, Kohen Mashiach is potter. Katani Mashiach ubezdin pturin, ma bezdin pturin mikulon, ap Mashiach potter mikulon. That when it says that, did I read? 1 second, flip back to nasi kayotze bo Mashiach ubezdin pturin. Right, b'diuk katani Mashiach ubezdin pturin. Yeah. So just right, we said that when it comes to oleh v'yored, Kohen Mashiach and Bezdin are pturin. So let's say that equally pturin. Just like Bezdin is potter in that they don't bring any Korbin oleh v'yoreds. So also the Kohen Mashiach, I would imagine, doesn't bring any Korbin oleh v'yoreds. But we had just said a minute ago that only for Tumas Mikdash v'Kodashav, a Kohen Mashiach doesn't bring a Korbin oleh v'yored for Tumas Mikdash v'Kodashav. But by Shvuas Edus, Shvuas Bitu, he would. But then now we're saying he wouldn't. What do we do? Hillel, what do we do? You got a solution for us, Hillel? What do we do? You gonna get it? Hillel, maybe you can get us out of this? Kasha no dadi, what do we do? Amr v'huna b'du Shia says v'huna b'du Shia lo kasha, no problem. Ha b'dalus, kan b'dalus, kan b'dalei dalus. Aha, now that's a nice answer. That when it says that a Kohen Gadol doesn't bring a Korbin oleh v'yored at all, that's specifically a reference to the flour offering of a Korbin oleh v'yored, right? Because as we learned earlier, now we learned from Rabbi Akiva, as the Gemara is about to say this, make this diuk in a second, but we had learned earlier from Rabbi Akiva, that Rabbi Akiva says, well, the only flour offering that a Kohen Gadol offers is the Minchas Chavitin. That's it. Not the flour offering of a Korbin oleh v'yored. Now Rabbi Akiva had taken it one step further and said, and therefore, since there's no flour offering of a Korbin oleh v'yored for a Kohen Gadol. There's no Korbin oleh v'yored for a Kohen Gadol. However, Reb Shimon doesn't take it that far, but he does agree that a Kohen Gadol would not offer the flour offering of a Korbin oleh v'yored. And therefore, when the Brisa says, when Reb Shimon says in the Brisa that a Kohen Gadol does not offer a Korbin oleh v'yored at all, it's referring to the flour offering of a Korbin oleh v'yored. A Kohen Gadol doesn't offer at all. But he would offer bird offerings, sheep/goat offerings for a Korbin oleh v'yored, so long as it is Shvuas Bitui, Shvuas Eidos, just not Tumas Mikdash v'Kodashav. Again, Amar Rav Huna b'Rav Yehoshua, lo kasher, it's no problem. Kan b'dalus, dalus. It depends. If we're talking about dali dalus, a flour offering, so that's when Reb Shimon says that Kohen Gadol doesn't offer any or Korbin oleh v'yored when we're talking about flour offerings. He doesn't offer the flour offering at all. However, if we're talking about dalus, if we're talking about the bird offerings or the sheep offerings, there a Kohen Gadol would offer it, but specifically for Shvuas Eidos, Shvuas Bitui, not for Tumas Mikdash v'Kodashim. Reb Shimon Savar Rabbi Akiva b'chado, follow Gadol b'chado. And Reb Shimon agrees with Rabbi Akiva in one respect, but not in the other. Sarvalak Rabbi Akiva b'dali dalus de potter. He agrees with Rabbi Akiva, his Rebbe, that a Kohen Gadol is completely potter when it comes to the flour offerings of the Korbin oleh v'yored. However, but where he disagrees with Rabbi Akiva is that whereas Rabbi Akiva says that since the Kohen Gadol does not offer the flour offering of an oleh v'yored, he doesn't offer any of the offerings. Reb Shimon disagrees and says that the Kohen Gadol would offer the bird or the sheep offerings of a Korbin oleh v'yored. It said in the Mishnah, Reb Shimon had said in the Mishnah that a Kohen Gadol does not bring a Korbin oleh v'yored for Tumas Mikdash v'Kodashim. The question is, how come Amar Chizkiah, by time Reb Shimon says Chizkiah, what's pshat? How come Reb Shimon says that? Because the Pasuk says v'nichusa hanefesh ha'i mitoch hakol. That by Tumas Mikdash v'Kodashim it says chorus v'nichusa hanefesh ha'i mitoch hakol. That the person who Tumas Mikdash v'Kodashav is the person who Tumas Mikdash v'Kodashavs is, who does that. So it says v'nichusa hanefesh ha'i mitoch hakol will be excised from the kahal, the congregation. So we're talking about somebody whose Korbin is the same as the rest of the congregation. To the exclusion of a Kohen Gadol, she'ein korbanoi shavel hakol. His Korbin is different than the rest of the congregation. The rest of the congregation, if they sing, they bring a Korbin chatas, a kispa v'seira. He brings a par Kohen Mashiach. If that's the case, nosi nami ein korban shavel hakol. But if that's the case, then we should say that a king is also not shaykh to Tumas Mikdash v'Kodashav, since his Korbin is also different than the rest of the congregation. He brings a sa'ir nasi. And for the Gemara, shaveh b'chapar the Yom Kippur, yes, but the nasi's Korbin is like everybody else's on Yom Kippur. And for the atonement of Yom Kippur, there's two options. Either you're getting atonement with the par hanaise bifnim or with the sa'ir hanaise bifnim. Now, in order to get atonement with the par hanaise bifnim, you have to be either a Kohen Gadol or a Kohen. Everybody else gets atoned for gets their atonement with the sa'ir hanaise bifnim. Cheve, Yom Kippur is coming up soon. I really hope that this year on Yom Kippur we will all have atonement with the sa'ir hanaise bifnim. I think we're ready for it, Chevra. I think we're ready for it. I think we're ready for it. I think we're ready for the Beis Hamikdash. I think we're ready for it. I think we're ready for it. So hopefully this year on Yom Kippur, we'll all get atonement, including with our king. Sheesh, who's going to be our king? I wonder. Anyways. What were we talking about? So the king on Yom Kippur gets atonement with the rest of Am Yisrael. So therefore, we want to say that the king is different from Am Yisrael because he has his own Sa'ir Nasi, but on Yom Kippur he's just like everybody else. The Sa'ir Anaisa Bifnim. Im Kein Ka'anim Nami Lo Shavu L'Kol B'Chapar Yom Kippurim. But the Kohanim also then should be considered different. They also shouldn't have the Korbin oleh v'yored by Tumas Mikdash v'Kedusha because they have a different Korbin. Their Korbin is different than everybody else's on Yom Kippur because they get their atonement with the Parah and Isa Bifnim. Kohanim shavu l'kol b'shar mitzvahs d'shana kula. Yeah, but the Kohanim are like everybody else with all other mitzvahs for the rest of the year. Mashiach nami oshave b'shar mitzvahs d'shana, but isn't the right? So Rashi, I think, explains with the shar mitzvahs d'shana that is talking about be'etzem the Parlam Davar Shal Tzibur, right? Where are we? Yeah, exactly. So okay. So we wanted to suggest that the Kohanim are different than everybody else because they get their atonement in Yom Kippur with the Parah and Isa Bifnim, which we say, yeah, sure, they get their own atonement with the Parah, their atonements with Parah and Isa Bifnim in Yom Kippur. But in terms of Parlam Davar Shal Tzibur, if Bezin ruled, let's say about Chelev and everybody at the Chelev, so the Kohanim would get their atonement with everybody else. But the thing is, so the Kohen Gadol, right? We had learned the other day, I don't remember, yesterday, the day before, that if Bezin ruled about Chelev and the Kohen Gadol ruled for himself about Chelev, so he would also get his atonement with everybody else. Salama Rave, rather says Rave, Eimachi, say like this, Misha Cheto Shavet Liyichidim Umaniu Koho. That by Tumas Mikdash V'Kadashav, one will only be chayiv a korban oleh v'yored if their chet is similar to the yechidim, meaning, well, in shigas maise, right? The Kohen Gadol, of course, is only chayiv is par Kohen Mashiach when there's helim dovrim shigas maise, which is different than everybody else. So everybody else is chayiv a korban chatas when it comes to shigas maise alone, even without a helim dover, shigas maisa. But as we learned, a Kohen Gadol is unique that he requires helim dover, him shigas maisa, which therefore makes him unique, and therefore that's why he doesn't bring a korban oleh v'yored for Tumas Mikdash v'Kodashav. Now the Gemara quotes the last section, the last phrase of the Mishnah, which is Rabbi Eliezer Omer Hanos mevi soyer v'chulei. Rabbi Eliezer says that when it comes to Korbin oleh v'yored, a king brings a sa'ir, brings a goat, which is essentially the same korban that the king brings in place of a korban chatas, right? The sa'ir nasi. So Amr Rabbi Yechanan says Rabbi Yechanan le Amr Rabbi Eliezer ela betumas mikdash v'kodashav hol v'ne'amar karizbo kibikvua. Oh, okay. So it says Rabbi Yochanan that when Rabbi Eliezer says that the king brings a sa'ir by korban oleh v'yored, that is not by all scenarios. So first of all, obviously the king isn't bringing a korban oleh v'yored by Shavuos HaEdos because he doesn't testify. So what's left? Shavuos Bituy and Tumas Mikdash v'Kedusha. So says Rabbi Yochanan that when Rabbi Eliezer says that a king brings a goat for instead of a korban oleh v'yored, Rabbi Yochanan says that Rabbi Eliezer says that specifically the king brings a goat by Tumas Mikdash v'Kodashav, because since Tumas Mikdash v'Kodashav has a chiyuv kares, just like by a chatas kavua, like by a regular korban chatas, right, chelev, right, for chelev, for example. So korban chatas is something that is dono a chayiv kares. So since Tumas Mikdash v'Kodashav also has chiyuv kares bizadon, so therefore Rabbi Eliezer says that the king would bring a sa'ir for that instead of a korban oleh v'yored. However, by Shavuos Bituy, for example, which is no chiyuv kares, he said he wasn't going to eat salad, and he ate salad or whatever. So there, the king would not bring a sa'ir. he would bring a regular korban olav yard, whatever he can afford, which I guess if he's the king, it would probably be a sheep. So again, Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, that when Rabbi Eliezer says that the king brings a sa'ir instead of a korban olav yored, that's Ela b'tumas mikdash v'kodashav, that's specifically by tumas mikdash v'kodashav. Hol v'nemar karisbo kebekvua, since by tumas mikdash v'kodashav there's a chiyuv karis, therefore it makes it similar to a regular korban chatas, and therefore Rabbi Eliezer says that the king will bring a sa'ir like he does in lieu of a korban chatas as he is the king. However, by Shavuos Bito he would bring a korban oleh, a regular korban olav yard. Omer Rab Papa says, Papa achinam mistav. Says, Papa, you know what? Taka Rabbi Yochanan hit the nail on the head. How come? Well, interestingly, because if Rabbi Eliezer is not just talking about Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashav, but also even by Shavuos Bitoy. Again, Shavuos Eidus is not relevant to king, but Shavuos Bitoy, he would also bring the goat. Well, then already, now we're going to have to say that Mirdei Sayr Nasi Ufar Mashiach B'Makom Yachid L'Chatas Koi. Well, a Nasi brings a Sayr Nasi instead of a regular Korban Chatas, and a Kohen Mashiach brings a par instead of a regular Korban Chatas. Now, if we're talking about more than just Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashav, well, then we should say that just like a Nasi is bringing a Sa'ir, well, then a Kohen Mashiach should bring a par. But Rabbi Eliezer doesn't say anything about the Kohen Mashiach. Now, of course, according to Reb Shimon, a Kohen Gadol doesn't bring any korban for Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashav. So, if we're saying that Rabbi Eliezer is specifically talking about Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashav, and he's saying that a king brings a sa'ir for Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashav because it says kares. Now, he doesn't say anything about the Kohen Gadol because the Kohen Gadol doesn't bring a korban for Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashav, as we just discussed. So, it's understandable why Rabbi Eliezer doesn't say anything about the Kohen Gadol. But if Rabbi Eliezer is not just referring to Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashav, if he's referring to all the korban olav yoretz, by the king it would be Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashav and Shavuos Bitoy, well then you should also have to point out, and the Kohen Gadol also brings a par for Shavuos Bitoy, for Tumas, for Shavuos Ha'edus. Right, so again, Amar Papa says, Papa achinam mistav, Taka makes sense to say that Rabbi Eliezer is specifically talking about Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashav. Tisagadati Rabbi Eliezer al Kulon Kamar, because if it enters your mind, Rabbi Eliezer is saying that the Nasi brings a sa'ir, not just for Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashav, but also by Shavuos Bitoy. So Michdei, sa'ir, Nasi, Ufar Mashiach, when it comes to the goat of the Nasi and the cow of the Kohen Gadol, B'Makom Yachid L'Chatas Koi is in lieu of a Korban Chatas of an individual, whereas an individual who needs to bring Korban Chatas brings a Korban Chatas. A Nasi or a Kohen Gadol doesn't. They have their own unique korbanos. So Nesne Nami, well then we should also say that if we're saying that the Nasi brings the goat by Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashav, but also by Shavuos Bitoy, well then we should also then say Mashiach Mevi Par, and the Kohen Gadol brings a cow. B'Shmias Kol Uvitus Vasayim, by Shavuos Bitoy, by Shavuos Ha'edus. Of course, not by Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashav, because the Kohen Gadol doesn't bring a korban for Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashav. But since it doesn't say anything about Par Kohen Mashiach, Shmamino at Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashav Koi, it must be that Rabbi Eliezer is specifically talking about Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashav, and the Nasi brings a sa'ir there, and the Mashiach Potter, a Korban Mashiach, doesn't bring any korban by Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashav, and that is why Rabbi Eliezer doesn't say anything about the Kohen Gadol, because he doesn't bring a korban for Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashav, but the Nasi, who does, brings a sa'ir. Amalei Rav Huna prayed to Rav Nosson and Rav Papa, but Rav Huna prayed to Rav Nosson says to Rav Papa, Mimai, Dim Rabbi Eliezer Akulon Koi. Maybe Rabbi Eliezer is talking about all of them, and that Rabbi Eliezer would say that Nasi would bring a sa'ir for Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashav, but also for Shavuos Bitoy. And then why doesn't it say therefore anything about Kohen Gadol? Uv Mashiach Savla Karbi Akiva Tam Mashiach Potter B'Chulon, and that by Kohen Mashiach maybe Rabbi Eliezer holds like Rabbi Akiva, that the Kohen Mashiach doesn't bring any korbanos at all when it comes to Korbin oleh v'yored for Shavuos Eidos, Shavuos Bitui, Tumas Mikdash V'Kedashav. That's why Rabbi Eliezer doesn't say anything about Kohen Gadol, because Kohen Gadol, he holds like Rabbi Akiva, that Kohen Gadol doesn't bring any Korbin oleh v'yoreds. Amalei, Rabbi Akiva, mi patole mi par, to which Rabbi Papa responds that, well, it gives a very interesting answer, that even according to Rabbi Akiva, who says that a Kohen Gadol doesn't bring a Korbin oleh v'yored by Shavuos Bitui, Shavuos Eidos, Tumas Mikdash V'Kedashav, argues of Papa that actually he would still bring a par. He wouldn't bring a Korbin oleh v'yored, not a sheep/goat, not birds, not a flour offering, but he would still bring a cow, however. And therefore, Rav Papa once again suggests that it must be that Rabbi Eliezer is specifically talking about Tumas Mikdash V'Kedashav, because if it was where it's not relevant to the Kohen Gadol, because he doesn't bring a korban for Tumas Mikdash V'Kedashav. However, if Rabbi Eliezer was talking about others, well, then we would have had to say something about the Kohen Gadol bringing a par. But since we don't, it must be that he's specifically talking about Tumas Mikdash V'Kedashav, Desu Lomidi, and that is settled. Rabbi Yochanan Moder Rabbi Eliezer she'en mevi ashum tali. So it says Rabbi Yochanan that Rabbi Eliezer nonetheless admits that even though he says that by Tumas Mikdash V'Kedashav, since it says kares, the nasi would bring a sa'ir, a goat, instead of a korban oleh v'yored, because it says kares. But even so, Rabbi Yochanan says that Rabbi Eliezer would say that a nasi would not bring in ashum talui for Tumas Mikdash V'Kedashav, meaning, right, an ashum talui is brought for a safek kares, for a safek kares, for a safek korban chatas. And if Rabbi Eliezer is saying that we should treat Tumas Mikdash V'Kedashav vis-a-vis a nasi like we would a regular korban chatas, and said that he brings a sa'ir since there's a chiyuv of kares, so maybe I'd have a havmina to say that he should also bring in ashum talui for Tumas Mikdash V'Kedashav. Now, normally we don't bring in ashum talui for korban oleh v'yored. So now says Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan Moder Rabbi Eliezer agrees she'ein mevi ashum talui, that he's not going to bring in ashum talui by Tumas Mikdash V'Kedashav. Tana commented of Sheshes, a Tana taught before of Sheshes, ashum talui ba Tumas Mikdash V'Kedashav, that you can offer an ashum talui for Tumas Mikdash V'Kedashav, which is korban oleh v'yored. Amar le, Rav Sheshes responds to this teacher, to this Tana, Dom Lachmani. Who says who? Rabbi Eliezer, you're saying that this is Rabbi Eliezer, the Amar, Hoil v'nemer b'karis kibakvua, Maisi Nazir, Nasi Sa'ir Leah. Is it like Rabbi Eliezer who says that a Nasi brings a Sa'ir Nasi by Tumas Mikdash V'Kedashav, since it says kares, and therefore, because since it says kares, you want to say that we'll treat it like a korban chatas, and that there's a ashum talui? But Rabbi Yochanan Moder Rabbi Eliezer she'ein, maybe ashum talui kasha. But Rabbi Yochanan had said that Rabbi Eliezer agrees that the Nasi would not bring in ashum talui for Tumas Mikdash V'Kedashav. Shtoch kasha hadjan olach hayra kohen Mashiach. We'll come back to you. Probably not before. Probably not in less than 7.5 years, but who knows? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe. Look, Horayos is only 14 daf. If you need to make a quick siyum, a very difficult quick siyum, but if you need to make a quick siyum, but then again, if you need to make a quick siyum, maybe something like Talmud, maybe it would be easier. But we haven't gotten to Talmud yet. It'll be about another 2 years until Talmud or so. Yeah, if you need to make a quick siyum, I mean, Horayos is a very difficult quick siyum. Okay, well, that was Daf Tes of Masechta Horayos. Sheesh, another daf that I thought wasn't going to be super long, but I don't think it was particularly short. It's probably an hour. It just seems like, honestly, like these days, it feels like an hour daf is a short daf, which is crazy. But I mean, these are difficult dafs here, Masechta Horayos. Anyways, we learned 2 mishnahs today, and we finished the second parak of Masechta Horayos. The first mishnah was saying out, Paralim Davar Shel Tzibur does not apply to korban oleh v'yoreds. And we discussed that, and we discussed kind of the who's chayav for what when it comes to Korbin oleh yards. And then we got to a second mishnah, which was kind of like a summary kind of mishnah, which kind of went over a whole bunch of the different korbanos in the different contexts, yachid, karmishiach, nasi, tzibur, etc., and kind of laid out who's chayav for what. So another kind of very detailed, technical Daf Yomi Horayos. Tomorrow, I will see you for Daf Yud and for the beginning of the third parak of Masechta Horayos. Cheers.